So your hang on, your direct quote to me on WhatsApp was where's it gone? Here we go. Intrigued to see how you link hyperconverged infrastructure and edge. Smile.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, right, and then
I'm saying no more. I'm going to
yeah, that's it. Let's move on.
Right.
Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. Well, it's another month, and here we are again for our regular slot. Welcome to the Cloud State of Play. So again, I have with me Paul Bevan. Paul is a Senior Director of IT Infrastructure at Bloor Research. So let's say hello to Paul. Hello, Paul. How are you doing?
Hi, Richard. I'm fine. Looking forward to our monthly chat, or our monthly rant. It should be good.
Indeed, yeah. So that should be good fun, as always. I always enjoy doing these ones with you. So for our topics for this month, we've selected one, vertical clouds. So I'm intrigued about that, and I want to know more about that from you. Number two, we've selected, are we going too fast in Devops? So maybe kind of reflect on that a little bit and dwell on that for a moment. Maybe slow down DevOps for a second and kind of talk about it first. So that's the second topic. And then the third one is edge computing versus hyper-converged infrastructure. What on earth is the difference between those two? So, as we said, we're going to kind of go through those for this month. So, yeah, let's start with vertical clouds. So I just want to say that I have no idea what Paul is going to say. We haven't rehearsed this. We did not script any of this. We did not discuss the definitions. So I'm just waiting for Paul to let me know what vertical clouds means.
Okay, no pressure then.
No pressure.
I suppose I came at this one from the fact that, you're starting to see the term vertical cloud more and more. We'll come back to who's talking about it in a minute. But, if you think about cloud, it is inherently horizontal. And therefore you're thinking, what on earth is a vertical cloud? If you look at the three layers of cloud, if we can sort of categorize it as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. The bottom layer is absolutely horizontal. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. You're effectively using the same technology. It's not a vertical, it's not a vertical solution. PaaS potentially, yeah, could be. And you look at that and think, and I've got a specific example. I've been working with a company in the trading space, in the financial services trading space. So like trading exchange, so currency exchange, stocks and shares, those sort of things. And of course, in that environment, you've got very specific requirements in terms of speed, latency, access to data, analysis, and you need the exchange data coming in, and you need sentiment analysis coming in. And I've been working with a company that has actually put together a platform that performs, they'd like to say it performs faster than even the fastest sort of in-house development, because the likes of a Merrill Lynch or Goldman Sachs all over them spent absolute fortunes on getting the fastest tech out there, because obviously a microsecond delay costs them millions in terms of lost trades.
Yeah.
But they've developed a platform that you put in the cloud. Really, really interesting. Very, very good. Very specific. But interesting, even that platform itself has capability to deliver the same sort of performance for ad serving or for multiple, the real-time gaming, real-time sort of betting type environments. And so even there, although it's like a use case. So rather than being a vertical cloud, there is a specific use case where the platform takes away all the problems from the developers of applications and said, I'll deliver you the absolute best environment. But again, is it truly vertical, or is it more a use case? And then I came back to the thought, well, actually, when you look at verticals, they're usually around applications. So isn't software as a service the ultimate, if you like, representation of a vertical cloud? Because actually, if you think about it, your software applications are very specific to individual companies, markets, groups of companies, or whatever. So, okay, maybe vertical clouds have been around for a long time, and it's really just a marketing exercise. And there's a danger in that too, isn't there? In the sense that people can call it I've got a vertical cloud, and the reality is they haven't. One of the things that slightly winds me up, and has done for many, many years, even prior to cloud, is this idea that things like financial services are a vertical. I have a story I asked people who are sort of talking around IT and infrastructure and vertical markets, etc. And people say, "Oh, we're in financial services," and it's very broad ranging. You've got everything from Lloyd's Bank on the high street, through mortgage companies to insurance companies, down to these high frequency traders, all very, very different. So the question I asked somebody, when they come and talk about vertical markets is Lloyd's Bank more like Merrill Lynch's trading division or Betfair? And so people stop and go, actually, the requirements, the technology requirements for Betfair are much closer to Merrill Lynch than Merrill Lynch's requirements are to Lloyd's TSB. So again, the danger is when people start talking about vertical clouds is that they generalize, and you end up without the right sort of solution and having to spend more and more time customizing it for the specific vertical you want to go to, which again, to my mind, is antithesis of a cloud environment. It's like, what are you doing? So we're doing two things. Firstly, cloud, I still think, is inherently horizontal. And the second thing is it's the sort of ability for everybody to lay their applications on the top of that, come hell and high water. If you start, making niche platforms and niche things underneath it, okay, maybe that's exactly what business needs, fine. But is it a cloud? All those sort of questions come to mind. And then you can argue the contrary that says, well, Bloor's view of cloud is it's a consumption model. So as long as you make that consumption model pay as you go, infinitely scalable, at speed, all those sort of things, maybe that's fine. But I think all I really wanted to talk about here was if you're, purchasing, if you're an IT director, if you're a business leader, and somebody walks through the door and says, "I've got the vertical cloud for you," think long and hard about, does it do the functionality you need? And are you sacrificing some of the benefits of the cloud in terms of, making costs operational rather than sort of having to invest a lot up front? And are you then having to do an awful lot of customization, which ultimately is going to unstitch you in the long term? So I think you just have to be careful looking at the term. I mean, if you use SAP or PeopleSoft, and that is a complete end-to-end, that's fine. But if somebody suddenly comes and says, "I've got a platform, a vertical platform," you've got to think, actually, is that what I really need? So I think it's just a cautionary tale. I like so much in the IT industry, as soon as a term, and this is really what I want to bring up, as soon as a term gets a level of currency, and I mean, Google Cloud have got 14 or 15 vertical clouds, AWS tout vertical clouds, Microsoft's probably got more reason than most to tout vertical clouds. But as soon as that currency gains, everybody else jumps on the bandwagon. And suddenly you get everybody saying, "Oh, I've got a vertical cloud." What on earth does that mean? Cloud ultimately is pretty horizontal. So I think that's that. Again, I could go on sort of meandering about that, but I mean that's really just, I think, be careful about that. Just look at the underlying requirements and say, does that really do what I want it to do? And is it is the vertical
Yeah.
actually the vertical I'm in. And I'm back to am I in financial services or am I in financial trade?
Right. Right. Yeah. So okay. Now that you've kind of defined what you meant by that, yeah, I can see that, and yeah, that's an interesting concept, and that's what would normally be sort of generally expected to be a kind of a a platform or an environment that's kind of universal, and you can really try and fit everything else into it. You're kind of trying to get it to fit to the application or the the area of the market that you're trying to address with that, which is interesting. It's kind of a bespoke cloud sort of thing.
Yeah, it is. But again,
It's almost, sorry to interrupt, but and this might be a little bit flippant, but it's almost like a mid-range computer, really, mid-range server system. It's like an AS400.
yeah,
So
absolutely. It'll
it's a
do
dedicated platform for only doing a few things and completely inflexible.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Do you start to give up the flexibility of the cloud generally? And so when somebody says, I've got the cloud, you've actually got to go and think, does it actually meet the criteria for cloud in terms of
exactly
pay for what you use, ability to scale up and scale down, all the sort of issues that sort of we've got come to accept as part of the cloud environment, or is it glorified managed service of a legacy environment? And that's the danger, that you actually end up with something that is effectively a legacy application that's being managed, and some sort of financial arrangement that makes it look like it's a cloud. But the reality is, when you want to change something, it takes a long time to do. So again, I think and I'm not saying that the clouds that Google and AWS and Azure are pushing are not genuine clouds, but I think it's worth people just taking a close look at how that hangs together and what that means for their. Because if you have to tailor it to meet your specific vertical requirement, then almost by implication, you're losing some, if not all, of the benefits of the cloud.
Yes, I mean, and also let's not forget that these general public clouds that we have are also trying to offer those kind of specific workload sort of environments as well, and they're actually genuinely interested in doing that. For example, and I'm sure everybody else is doing this as well, but just as a kind of a more up-to-date example is AWS, doing their own ARM-based processors. So that's really, going to be beneficial for those people who want to number crunch. So that sort of HPC specific market, that high performance computing market, HPC market, can actually start considering, very seriously, doing HPC in AWS, thanks to that infrastructure that AWS is providing, and they for that type of application, because they know that type of application is heavy on compute and requires blah blah blah. So all of the things that it needs are basically they're trying to cater for that.
Yeah, but that's a use case, not a vertical cloud. Because actually HPC will be required in a number of different vertical industries. And again. And one of the things that I'm finding sort of fascinating, and it's the sort of mismatch of understanding at the sort of the business manager board level, is that this idea that it's just racks and racks and racks of pizza servers, pizza box, rack and rack together.
Yeah.
Actually, when you're looking at the trading application one was an absolute classic, which was a combination of GPUs, field programmable gate arrays, different, non-volatile memory, everything to make this thing really fly, which is anything but a general purpose. It's a specific use case. And so I keep coming back to the think use case rather than vertical. But I agree with you. I mean, there's lots of different, who would have thought a few years ago that, you'd get AI in the cloud, again, because it's a high performance compute job.
Okay, so Paul, on to our second topic, which was kind of a pondering question, I guess, asking about, are we going too fast in DevOps? What was your idea around that?
So I sort of come across a couple of reports in the last couple of weeks that really sort of brought it home to me. And I think one was, if you've ever seen Thousand Eyes, they do an outage blog. So they analyze all the outages across the internet. But they sort of quarterly, they do an internet report as well. And it was the internet report this last quarter that was intriguing. And obviously during that period, you had a fairly sizable Google outage. When Google search itself went down, but it brought down certainly Google Maps and some on Gmail as well. And the point that was being made quite strongly when they looked at right across the quarter was one that the number of outages actually was increasing globally across the quarter. And the vast majority of them were down to software, software upgrades. So when there's a change, and this comes back to this idea that DevOps is all about speed and change, and how quick. So you are constantly providing updates and upgrades to the software. That potentially is where things happen. So that was number one, which sort of said, okay, there seems to be some evidence out there that it's not hardware falling over. It's there are problems with hardware, but by and large, the large outages are actually being caused when software upgrades don't work properly, and they have to rewind. And we've had a few of those. The second was an interesting report I saw from Moodside. It was called "The State of Availability 2022," and I'll provide links to you so you can sort of add these all to the the thing at the end.
That'll be useful.
And that was based on around 1,900 interviews with sort of people across a wide range of industries, but also CIOs at one level, IT ops people, and business leaders as well. And it was really interesting in the sense that a couple of points came out that sort of made me sit up and think. The first was that IT operations is spending way too much time monitoring and chasing reactively, and therefore doesn't have enough time to get involved in the sort of front end SRE type DevOps chain that says, well, let's get it right before we put it out there. And the second that was sort of slightly mind-blowing was the gap in perception between business leaders and senior business leaders and the IT ops people about whether they were doing DevOps. So senior business people tended to think they were doing DevOps, and most of the IT ops people were saying, well, we're not there yet. We'd love to be, but we're spending all our time, chasing after reactive problems. And even on the report shows that even that they're not catching an awful lot of them anyway. So there was this, and you and I have talked in the previous talk about GitOps, which at the time we said, look, seems to be a reaction to the fact that Ops was at the back end of the chain, and they had to do something to catch up with what was happening in terms of the push from DevOps. And there was no effective pulling and sort of monitoring of that. So in order to help SREs, GitOps is one heck of a tool set, but it had come quite late to the argument. So again, these things are all sort of backing up and saying, look, okay, is there a general problem that actually, we've let the developers off the leash, as it were. In the old days, it would have been years and years and years to get sort of upgrades. It was, I go back to my mainframe days, you'd sort of wave goodbye to developers for about 18 months and then see if they came back with the right thing. And of course, it's changed dramatically. We've let them off the leash. The reality is that everything is so interconnected that, if you aren't ensuring it's right first time up front, the implications, it's like when you're trying to put wallpaper up on the wall. You've ever tried that? My wife does it brilliantly, but I'm hopeless. Put it up, and as you press it down, a bubble appears somewhere else. And every time you do this, that's what it feels like with some of the sort of interconnectedness. The amount of data that's needed and the amount of information you get, the sort of correlation of whatever else is going to be in fact impacted. And you get the impression it's all these little sort of upgrades have much, much bigger implications than we give them credit for. So that was, and my whole thing about speed came from a completely different angle, which was a talk. I think it was it a CBI talk? It was a real business oriented one that said, you know, if you're a medium-sized enterprise or a small and medium-sized enterprises, how invested are you in real speedy change? Yeah, and actually they've probably been doing the same thing for years and it works. And so again, the sense was that there's a startup mentality, there's a very large company mentality, but there's a huge number of people for whom, you know, actually stability is more important than rapid speed of change.
Yeah.
And have we become too obsessed with speed? So I suppose I was bringing the 3 or 4 threads together. The one that says, you know, evidence suggests that it's software updates that tend to cause the problems in these large scale outages.
Right. Yeah.
IT ops still way behind the curve. I mean, the other thing that was, you know, if you come back to my particular hot topic, which is always, you know, the infrastructure management and monitoring piece, is that people are still using way too many tools. In fact, we've not managed to reduce the number of tools. And the whole point is that IT ops is still going round and round in a flat spin, trying to catch up with things that happened in the past rather than getting ahead of the game. And then this other one that says, have we over-obsessed on speed? Because, you know, a vast number of companies out there don't quite need that level of speed. Now, obviously, you know, there are certain environments that do, so I'm not going to, I'm not going to rubbish it completely.
Yes.
So it was really just a chance for people to say, oh, just stand back, think about this again. I mean, it feels like we're sort of rushing into it. Go, speed, and it goes, and then, and again, you know, with my sort of wall hanging of wallpaper piece, you know, you didn't spot where the other problems are going to be until you hung it up and go, oh, goodness me, I've got problems all over the place.
Yeah, so it's kind of a, if I can sort of, I mean, just briefly, it's kind of a, is this kind of the speed compromising the quality sort of thing, I guess. And I guess GitOps is kind of maybe a knee-jerk reaction to the continuous deployment, the CD aspect of CI/CD. And I think we'd probably need to come back to GitOps at some point. We kind of introduced it, I think, last time around, but we need to maybe kind of talk a little bit more about it and kind of get into a bit more detail and get a little bit more philosophical, I guess, on it. But that's certainly kind of, maybe a kind of a reaction to that. But I just kind of wanted to push back a little bit on something. My thing would be to say, but isn't kind of, you know, that sort of those statistics that are kind of, you know, coming out in terms of availability and uptime and things like that, isn't that kind of thing though part of DevOps? Isn't kind of the DevOps mentality to be, you know, kind of loosely coupled, fail fast approach, and, you know, to actually include deliberate failures in the system using things like chaos engineering, you know, sort of approach in order to say, well, you know, how resilient is this if I fail it? What if I, you know, pull out this virtual cable? You know, what if I stop this service and kill that pod in that Kubernetes container? What if I kill the whole Kubernetes, you know, cluster? What would be the kind of the recovery process for that? And how's the system going to cope? So I just kind of thinking maybe, you know, those statistics might be a little bit raw, and they're kind of maybe looking at DevOps from maybe a different sort of angle, where actually DevOps welcomes failure and expects failure. In the data center, we're very used to saying, you know, 5 nines, and we can't afford any failures, and everything's highly available and resilient and so on. In DevOps, we say, you know what, things are going to happen. The brand stuff is going to hit the fan at some point, and we're just going to have to deal with that. And, you know, we just need to architect a really good environment in the cloud so that we can cope with those things. And we'll use things like, you know, chaos engineering and SRE to deal with those failures.
Again, I don't disagree with that, but I think I would suspect that corners have been cut, you know, and therefore, you know, even there, when you're talking about that, you've still got to do some work up front in terms of architecting it and thinking, what's going to happen. And hopefully you might do some automated testing to see whether that's going to happen before it hits production.
Yeah.
So I think it's, is there a problem between, the sort of development, test and production phase that says in certain cases, you're not as thorough as you need to be, or the system, and right back to the architecture, the system can't actually handle, the failure, because actually you haven't been able to spot all the interdependencies of applications. I mean, the Google one was classic, in the sense that, yes, it was simply an update to the actual Google search engine.
Yeah.
But Google, what other applications use that? And then when that had a problem, had they thought that Google Maps wouldn't be able to get at the information, or vice versa, when you click on a Google map and say, oh, there's, find me some restaurants nearby, and then of course that relies on Google search. So I think there's, so I think I understand that, but if you were to be a business person, saying, what is the risk to my business? How much downtime can I accept? Back to high frequency trading. They can't, full stop. It's almost like, you make it as near 100% availability and lowest latency possible. But other areas don't need that and can survive problems. But again, I think you mentioned architecture, and maybe that's another one for us to think about, is that, what is the role of the enterprise architect these days? Because the enterprise architect was always sort of the person that had both the interests of the business and the technology at heart, trying to marry those two, sometimes competing requirements together.
Yeah.
So I don't, I'm not accusing DevOps people of the developer side of ignoring that. I'm thinking, there are times when it needs to be right first time.
Okay, so let me kind of maybe another sort of approach to that, and let me know if you sort of agree or disagree with that. Is it kind of, are we looking at the same thing, and kind of DevOps seems to be at the center of it, but are we looking at this from sort of a sort of a technology and sort of principles sort of aspect of it? What are the DevOps principles? What is the sort of DevOps mantra, if you like, versus kind of the business expectations from that, or maybe the business not understanding that sort of mantra that DevOps comes from? And again, it's a kind of bit of a culture clash maybe between sort of the DevOps culture versus kind of how business wants to do IT.
Well, some interesting terminologies. I love that last one, how business wants to do IT.
Yeah, exactly. Let me note that one down.
I think if I'm a CIO or a CTO, I tell, say to the business people, you tell me what you need from the business.
Yeah.
Don't tell me how to run the IT.
Yeah.
Then I will deliver what you need.
Yeah.
So again, if that's a culture issue that says the business people think they know IT better than the IT people, God help us. It's like IT creepers. But on the other hand, this idea that business hasn't understood the DevOps mantra, shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
Business should be saying, here's what I'm trying to do with my business. Here's what happens if I don't have the information, or here's what happens if my customers can't get hold. All those sort of issues.
Right.
The way in which you, CIO, CTO, who want to deliver that is up to you, as long as you can give me a level of assurance that I can do that. And if it goes wrong and everything, we all know things go wrong.
Yeah.
How quickly can you recover? So, I think it's the danger is you make it, the business doesn't understand DevOps, or IT doesn't understand the business. They're not mutually exclusive. I mean, the two have got to sort of work together. I mean, and again, where's the person doing the translation in the middle? Because you don't expect the developer at the far end to be worried too much about PE ratios and revenues and all those sort of things. He wants, to deliver that.
Yeah.
So likewise, you wouldn't expect the finance director or the operations director to be thinking, I need to understand Devops.
Yeah.
No. So I think it's, there's a sort of halfway house there somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree that there is some knee-jerk reactions, and like I said, GitOps kind of being potentially one of those. We've sort of tried to perfect the way that we deploy applications or services faster to the cloud. That's DevOps. Thank you very much. But we haven't kind of been consistent with what we're deploying to is the environment that I'm about to deploy to, for the first time or again. Is it actually the environment that my application expects, and is it going to work? And that's essentially what GitOps is trying to ensure. So it kind of gives you that sort of insurance for that. And also, I'm just seeing a few things, and again, kind of around that sort of because I mean, things like Kubernetes, for example, is a direct recipient of DevOps. So what do you do in DevOps kind of ends up being in running in Kubernetes somewhere. So I'm also seeing a little bit around sort of Kubernetes, whether Kubernetes is kind of going too fast as well, and there's some areas of Kubernetes that need to be kind of more advanced than they are at the moment. It's kind of not able to do certain aspects that maybe some enterprises, some customers actually want it to do. So kind of a federated implementations and kind of being more universally managed than it is at the moment. So if you have a cluster in AWS and another one in Azure, and kind of you want to manage both, you can do that with a few of the tools. Yes, there is a lot of the kind of third-party distributions, Kubernetes distributions now offer that, but is that actually kind of fully realized, and is it flexible, is it open, or you kind of again tying yourself down to certain types of APIs and stuff like that? So those, I think I see, yes, as that. I would probably still kind of want to push back a little bit on the sort of the DevOps kind of view that it's going too fast. I think it's missing bits, and I think we need to maybe, like GitOps has kind of maybe shown that, and like I said, we'll probably revisit GitOps at some point, but that's there is still a lot of goodness that's come out of that process, and it's certainly helped the business to accelerate.
I certainly agree with that.
Yeah,
we certainly don't want to go back to the days of 18-month cycles before you see it.
Exactly. No,
absolutely not. But so I think it just, again, I think I was just highlighting something where it, just be aware that at times, if we do keep this pace of change up, the ability to keep handling that pace of change, it's stretched. And of course, areas we haven't touched on, the availability of resource and people, and how good is the automation that's there now?
Indeed,
how good are the process, all those. So
yeah, no, absolutely, yeah, and I think there's a lot of food for thought there, definitely, and good points, I think, on either side around that. Okay, so let's move on to the third subject, which was going to be kind of edge computing versus hyperconverged infrastructure, or even edge cloud versus hyperconverged infrastructure. Now, I think for me, all those three things are different. So kind of edge computing is different from edge cloud, and again, they're different from hyperconverged infrastructure, or HCI. So if we kind of lump edge computing and edge cloud into one, let's kind of call edge computing the infrastructure for running a cloud, and then we kind of focus on edge cloud maybe versus hyperconverged infrastructure. For me, hyperconverged infrastructure was something that we tried to kind of address certain business needs in terms of agility and time to value and time to market and things like that. And I think that was admirable for what it was doing. It certainly automated certain things. It certainly made certain things very, kind of a click and collect kind of approach, very quick, and it allowed you to stand up a computing environment in remote satellite offices or federated sort of wide area networks and things like that quite quickly. But for me, it was still kind of a data center approach in terms of the architecture, certainly not the agility and speed and the automation that you would maybe get from sort of a cloud computing environment. So I would still put that in. Our dear viewers have not seen this, but may get to put it up at some point. My sort of stages of sort of migration to cloud, and I would kind of still put it in that sort of transient IT stage. It's not really HCI is not really kind of in that sort of cloud computing space per se, as we kind of come and know and expect cloud computing to be. So that for me is kind of where really hyper-converged infrastructure comes from. Edge cloud is really trying to do a lot of the things that you would do centrally in the cloud and in a public cloud, actually taking those to like a satellite location. So rather than having to build things manually and one step at a time, one layer at a time in that remote location, you'd really bring in the goodness of all the stuff you've developed in the cloud to that edge location, to that sort of satellite office, or whatever it is that you have, or maybe a environmental sort of location somewhere, maybe on a ship, or building a construction site, or somewhere where you've got lots of IoT devices, for example, and you need to kind of ingest a huge amount of data very quickly. And then obviously you're not going to send all of that data, shunt all of that data back to HQ, back to your cloud. You're going to maybe process it and just send back some metadata or something. So all the stuff that you're doing there in the public cloud, you can actually kind of take that to the edge and do the do a similar sort of function there. So from a sort of an architecture point of view, it's kind of a federated sort of view, but also from a technology point of view, you're transferring the same skills as well. So the skills that you've learned in the cloud and kind of working in public cloud solutions, you can now take to the edge and do the same thing in an edge cloud environment as well. So the same software layers, the same development tools, the same observability, same way that you address storage, same way that you push out code to that edge cloud as well. But obviously all still being centrally managed, just kind of the compute is being done locally.
Yeah, it's interesting that edge cloud one particularly is where does that actually, where is that edge, if I can put it like that? Because if you look at coming it the other way from the sort of IoT and sensors and machine to machine that's going on, and capturing all that data in a local manufacturing plant, logistics, wherever, and as you say, analyzing, doing it all. The idea that you can use modern cloud techniques is absolutely right, and why wouldn't you? But effectively, I think what you're talking about there is private cloud. I don't think at that point you're talking about public cloud, not unless a big manufacturing organization, somebody decides that all the local stuff is got locally, it can allow other people to come and share the architecture, and share the resources. So I think there's a level of where does that, AWS outposts, Azure Stack, where does that actually sit? How far out to the edge? And I think there's a sort of regional data center, regional centers of those where I think that potentially plays. The question, of course, is, you're getting a little bit of a lock-in. If you're doing, AWS outposts, you're getting not only all the operating environment from AWS, you're getting their kit too. So you're almost locking yourself into an AWS only environment, which maybe, and I always say this, and maybe from a business point of view, is exactly the right thing to do. It's the best, the best operations outcome. I suppose I'm, again, pushing back a little bit on your HCI analogy, is that HCI is merely the infrastructure layer. The fact that the Dells of this world or the IBMs of this world, we're also packaging these things up into, an HP, packaging them up into, and the tags and people like that, all packaging it up into a box. Yes, that looks very much like the old data center mentality, but actually, the way in which they put their business case there and their sort of operations together, you could roll these things out really quickly. You could make them, you could put it on the floor and allow people to switch on more and switch off fairly rapidly. So to me, the HCI piece is really another way of deploying the infrastructure as a service, and the fact that you would tend to do it in maybe in a back office somewhere, in a retail outlet or a warehouse. It's just a way of having a much more controlled environment. As long as you can use the, if you like, the operational virtualization software, software-defined approach that will enable you to use all the other tools and techniques that you would normally use in a cloud environment. I suppose my question, when we've talked about edge cloud in the past, it always comes out as Azure's edge cloud or AWS's edge cloud or Google's edge cloud, which is fine, but it has its limitations in my view. In that you can do, let's call it cloud for want of a better term, as a consumption model right out at the edge, but it just won't be with the same interface, if you like, if that sort of operational interface that you get when you get AWS. And I think there's a challenge of coming from AWS down to the sort of sensor level. I mean, AWS will say, oh yeah, we do that, we do this, is great. But actually, when you think about the challenge, and what we've seen is quite a lot of work being done now to get common APIs, even to the old software development SDKs, into some of the older bits of operational technology to try and make it a less complex environment for people to actually integrate with. Because at the moment, we'll say we've got operational technology that's been around for yonks, and actually, I want to pick the information out of that, and I do want it to communicate with the internet, and I do want it to do all the other things. So I think, there's a level of, does an HCI box sit well in that sort of environment? I'd say probably yes, it does. Does it have cloudy capabilities? Yeah. Is it a cloud in the sense of an AWS or a Google or an Azure? No, it's not. But I think I don't see currently, a real rationale for taking those right out, the AWS outposts right out to the edge. Nice as it sounds. I mean, AWS have got huge resources. It may well be that they're, doing every API under the sun and every SDK under the sun. So whatever sensor you've got at the far end, AWS can go, hey, we can lock into that. And yes, we'll put a little AWS. Because reality is, an AWS outposts implementation is HCI by another name.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's
I'm being,
I know you are.
For the hell of it.
I know you are.
But
I know you are.
I mean,
yeah.
Outpost wheel of boxing. What did
Yeah. And I think it's the kind of the difference I see is that it's kind of, again, HCI, just like edge computing. So if you're kind of going to do edge computing, then you'd kind of wheel in the hardware, you'd kind of do all your firmwares and stuff like that. You'd install the hypervisor or operating system and install your app. You bring in your data, you connect it, and that's kind of your edge computing. HCI kind of came in as a with all of that sort of pre-built, ready to go. Obviously, one of the drawbacks is that you couldn't decouple the storage from the compute, from the network, and whatever else was in that sort of HCI box. You could maybe be storage heavy, but you still need a CPU in there to run it, because that it's it's a distributed operating system, right? That's how it essentially works. Which again, you could maybe kind of say, well, why can't I just use Mesos and go to D2IQ and kind of ask for Mesos or something like that. So again, that would be kind of a question on that. But so once you've kind of got that sort of environment in HCI, then you could kind of you have more modules to bolt on if you kind of want to beef up the the processing capability in a particular satellite office or a remote location. As we said, you just bring another HCI box and you connect it to the existing one into the network, and off it goes. There's no need for configuring, updating firmware, installing operating systems and hypervisors and so on. So that kind of that kind of gets you to a particular layer of the software, whereas kind of edge cloud for me is not only taking you higher up in that software stack, so beyond the operating system and all that sort of operating environment. Obviously, you bring the goodness of how you deploy to a cloud into that environment as well. So all the automation and various other things, the skill set that you've already learned and invested in, again, can continue in an edge cloud environment. I agree whether Outposts, Azure Stack, Anthos, and so on, and even EKS Anywhere, which I'm hoping to do a talk on soon, would kind of fit into that sort of environment, and how that would actually perform in that sort of edge cloud sort of physical location, really. So I don't know. I mean, I want to see some more use cases in that, and don't forget, the likes of Microsoft distinguish. At least they used to. I'm not really sure they do that. Maybe somebody in the comments can correct us, but they used to distinguish. So they have distinction between Microsoft Azure Stack and Microsoft Azure Stack HCI. So there's a clear distinction in their portfolio in terms of what Azure Stack is versus what Azure Stack HCI is. So again, I think it's a little bit blurred in that sort of space. I agree with you in terms of, can we put that sort of stuff at the real physical edge sort of what we're doing? And what does that look like? And how's, is that still kind of an extended cloud, or is it, as you said, it's now become a private cloud, or kind of an enclosed cloud of some kind? That's all there. But again, regardless of that, I still see that the technology can, you can build at a higher level in the software stack than you would do with just normal edge computing or HCI. Plus, you're continuing to use the same skill set. So resource and time taken to provision those things is, again, quite valuable. And maybe one of the things that people, kind of enterprises don't really take too much into consideration. But that cost that you're, of the resource and the time that the time that resource is spending to deploy that platform and craft it and configure it and kind of bring it in.
And in the current climate of skill shortages, cost pressures, that's maybe something that will
absolutely
will drive a lot more. And as you say, I made reference to the very deep pockets that something like AWS has got, and if they can see a real opportunity there to provide that commonality at the sort of right at the right at the edge, so that the platform issue at the moment is quite a challenge for IoT platforms. If they can get over that, then I think a lot of what you just said, layered on top of that, would be a real benefit.
So can we just kind of flippantly, can we coin it as edge cloud?
As you say, I come back to that sort of, is it a consumption model we're talking about here? Because if you get into the technology of it, then I think we will argue about this till the cows come home.
Yes.
Is it a cloud edge, or is it an edge cloud? Is it actually,
we're going to be all day for that one.
Absolutely. We'd be here. And really it is, from a business's perspective, can I get my IT department or my cloud provider to deliver to me on a per use, highly scalable, very agile, flexible route? And if the IT department goes, the only way I can do that is require AWS Outposts. Okay, fine.
Yeah, I agree. Excellent. Okay, well, I think we're at the end of this session. So again, Yeah, just wanted to say thank you, Paul, for your time. I really appreciate it. We always appreciate your insights and kind of the discussions that we have. Yeah, and I think that's it for this month. So hopefully you've enjoyed this talk.
It's always expands my my thought processes. I must admit, I have to go away and lie down in a darkened room afterwards because we get so many of these things going. But
gather your thoughts.
They're great. They're great fun and keeps an old man's brain sort of pretty
thinking.
Active,
indeed. Well, like I said, I appreciate it very much, Paul. So yeah, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this talk. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, please. That will really help me a lot. And we'll see you next time. What was your title again? Senior, what did you say? Senior Research?
So I'm Research Director, IT Infrastructure.
Sorry, Research
Director.
I keep demoting you, don't I?
You do, I know. It's all right. Story of my life. I know my place. Yeah.